pick up Philosophers on God for a tenner if you're interested in learning some more on philosophy of religion. But what I do in the book is I painstakingly go through all of the arguments and show that there is a massive cumulative case that if God exists, God is good. And I get a lot of people saying, like, you believe, like you keep getting asked as well, Jordan, do you believe in God, right? You've just had 2 books come out on God. People assume that I'm this theist, I'm trying to convert people. And I think we should give the best arguments for atheism if we're going to be atheists. But that's not one of them. This isn't a good argument. Just run the problem of evil. It's a classic for a reason.
Well, the other thing, too, that we should take serious stock of is that a naively good spaghetti monster in the sky, let's say, would be a justly parodied character. Now, one of the things that you can't say about the Old Testament authors was that they were naive. They're not naive. Now, the great heroes of the Old Testament corpus, they're not good people when they start. Like, they might have an upward striving instinct or a calling, let's say, or a prod of conscience, but they do what they can to fight it, and they suffer along the way, and they produce an awful lot of misery. The human characters in the Old Testament are very realistic. They're very multidimensional. Now, the same can be said for the characterization of God. And I can understand why Dr. Dawkins, for example, objects to the cataclysmic roughness of the biblical accounts. But what we also have to understand is that they had to contend, for example, with the ethics of war. Now, if the atheist types had a better answer to the ethics of war than the Old Testament corpus, then Dawkins' point would be well taken, but they don't. So now, and there's other things I think that Dr. Dawkins doesn't understand about the biblical corpus too, is that the force against which the chosen people strive in the Old Testament corpus, it's always the descendants of Cain. Well, Canaanites. It's always the descendants of Cain. This actually means something from a literary perspective. It means that those who climb Jacob's ladder will and should be victorious over those who fail to make the proper sacrifices, who are bitter, resentful, arrogant usurpers, because those are the descendants of Cain. And this is an eternal struggle. It's laid out in the antithesis between Cain and Abel, which is really the first historical story in the biblical corpus, because, of course, the story of Adam and Eve takes place in paradise itself. And so the war that God is fighting, let's say, on behalf of the chosen people is a war against evil. Now, then you might say, well, what's the morality of a war against evil? And the answer to that is, well, set the situation up to begin with so that evil doesn't prevail. That means that you walk in the pathway of the truth and that you say, like Jonah did, what is on your conscience, and that you walk upward Jacob's ladder. Now, let's say you fail to do that, and the forces that produce the flood mount, or the forces that produce the totalitarian state of the Tower of Babel arise, and you find yourself in the midst of a complete bloody catastrophe. Well, then maybe all you have left open to you are bad choices. And so, I mean, we think that the Second World War was a just war, all things considered. Well, that doesn't make it a paradisally desirable situation. I also don't think it's something that you can lay at the feet of God. You know, if it is the case that human beings have the choice between good and evil, and it is the case that we have something to do that's real, then the consequences of our failure to abide by the divine order are real, and not only real, but cataclysmically real. And I happen to think that that's true. There's no foisting that off on God. Not, you know, there's a balance there. We have something important to do, and we have choice. The world's real, and we have agency. Okay, one of the consequences of that is that we can bring evil into the world. Now, that's a different question than, is there evil implicitly in the world? You know, the battle for life and death that characterizes existence. Those are separate questions. Human beings can genuinely bring evil into the world. Is the world evil in its essence? What's the answer to that? If you assume that and act in consequence, you'll make it worse. Now, I know that's a consequentialist argument. It's not the only argument, but it's not a bad one to begin with.